Deputy President, I rise to speak on the planning legislation today, noting, of course, that our Shadow Minister in this area, Luke Foley, has given a detailed response to the legislation and outlined the areas where Labor will be seeking amendments. He's also outlined our approach on this, that we oppose the legislation in its current form, but we are willing to support if we are able to get appropriate amendments done for legislation. So I won't go over all of those, except briefly on two areas. Firstly, Labor's concern over the extent of code-accessible development and the fact that there appears to be a plan by the government to apply that in what you'd have to call an uneven way, where some communities are to have code-accessible development and some aren't. And also to highlight the concerns which a number of people have raised with me about heritage and how it will be dealt with under that code-accessible process and under the legislation, and fears that heritage is not being appropriately protected. That is something which I am interested in, that we need to have a system which does adequately protect heritage buildings in our cities as well. And that's not just the fact that my mother is a member of the Cogra Historical Society and has been talking to me about it, but that is a concern which I'll be looking out for as we go through this process, and particularly the committee stages of the process. And I endorse Luke Foley's comments on a number of areas which require amendment in this legislation. I do want to highlight some areas, though, that are particularly a concern to me in the shadow portfolio areas that I hold. First of all, and those that I represent from the other place as well. The first one I just wanted to put on record is the fact that I received a letter from the Rural Fire Service Association which is expressing concerns about the planning legislation. It's a letter that's gone out to a number of people, from Tim Arnott, the President of the Rural Fire Service Association, which says, and I quote, "It has come to the attention of the Association that the proposed changes to the planning legislation by the New South Wales Government have the potential to change the authority and powers of the Commissioner of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service in their relationship to the Director-General of the Department of Planning. The RFSA views these changes embodied in the proposed legislation with alarm and would seek amendments such that there are no changes proposed which would have the potential to diminish in any way the Commissioner's role and sole right to determine integrated developments in their concurrence with the Rural Fire Service Act and the associated regulations. The RFSA does accept the Government's prerogative to gain improvements in the development process and acknowledges these initiatives. However, New South Wales has developed a system of legislation and complementary standards and guidelines which lead the nation in areas of community safety in regard to the threat of wildfires." They go on to note that the bill is they're making representations and so on. New South Wales has been a leader in this area around Australia in giving the Rural Fire Service the Commissioner to approve or object to developments which are in bushfire-prone areas. It's something which sets us apart from most other states, and it's something that, and we were talking earlier about the Rural Fire Service, but again the Victorian Royal Commission, after theirs, highlighted this difference in planning laws, and it would be of great concern if the Rural Fire Services Commissioner's power was downgraded from being able to actually stop a development or approve or disapprove a development down to being just an advice to the Department of Planning. So I would ask the government to look at that issue and flag that as being something which I think is a concern that so far I don't think has received enough focus. I'm also Shadow Minister, of course, for mining and for primary industries, and I want to, in quite strong contrast to the previous speaker, Dr. Kay, highlight the fact that in any system you must have state-significant planning provisions. The problems, Dr. John Kay's comments that they're a virus that corrupts the process, just completely ignores the fact that for major projects like a mine, they are well outside of the capacity for local councils to properly deal with. They do need to have state involvement in the process, and that state involvement is critical. The issue is not whether or not you need state-significant development, it's the extent to which it's used by the Minister. And I do think that's an important important area that you can differentiate throughout this process. State significant development, as I said, is critical for major projects in New South Wales, and I strongly endorse the need for it. It doesn't need to be extended to the levels that it occasionally has been in the past, but I do think that that the economic benefits of these are absolutely critical. I mean, we'll never get planning laws that satisfy the Greens. If we did, we'd have no jobs growth happening in our community. Their campaigning is all about their constituency, which is essentially they are a party built on NIMBYism, and no serious party of government can afford to be just a party built on NIMBYism. The government doesn't miss out on criticism in this area either, because that's exactly what their last election campaign was. They said they were going to return the local planning powers to local communities and abolish Part 3A. They did that for purely political purposes. It wasn't promises which they should have made, but they thought it was an opportunity to win votes. They are not doing that in this legislation, not by any stretch of the imagination are they returning local planning powers to local communities. And yes, they've changed the name of Part 3A, but it's still there, as other members have appropriately pointed out. But as I said, they should have been honest and upfront before the last election and acknowledged that you do need state significant development provisions in planning laws. And the key criticism that I've heard from industry in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, has been the instability in planning, the uncertainty in planning. That's something which absolutely needs to be dealt with. In an ideal world, it would be great if we had planning legislation which was able to carry over the transitions of governments, which gave all people in the community certainty and confidence in that legislation. The reality of this is we will never get a planning legislation which everyone thinks is great. A lot of the statements made by the Minister in the other place, he's made very glowing praise of his own work, are really pie in the sky. He's not going to get legislation which everybody says is fantastic. And my experience is that whenever someone gets a planning decision against them, they will complain about the legislation that it's been made under. They will often say that the process has been corrupt, whether or not there is any evidence of that. And I think it's a bit sad that we have too easily in New South Wales, and have had for the last decade or so, people who like to portray corruption which is never proven to actually exist. And that we heard that in the last speech. The suspicion of the protection against corruption needs to be strong in planning laws, but planning laws and confidence in planning processes are not helped by people who make accusations of corruption simply because they don't agree with a planning decision. And that is often what we see. Yes, let's make sure we have robust systems which are as corruption protected as they possibly can be, and strong scrutiny. And the best scrutiny comes from a system which is open and transparent, which is able to be scrutinised by the members of the public, those who are and are not affected by a decision. We have seen 2.5 years of instability. I hope that at the end of this we will see a government accepting amendments from Labor which will give us a bill which provides the stability industry and the community needs in planning, but which does deal with the overreach in this legislation when it comes to code-assessable development and the other areas that the Honourable Luke Foley highlighted in his area. The issue about growth areas is a difficult one. It's very hard to, for instance, invest a huge amount of money in the North West Rail link and then allow communities to block development around the transport nodes that are going to be connected. Yes, there will be objections to that, but you simply can't justify an investment like that, which incidentally I've criticised on numerous occasions, but it's hard to justify an investment like that if you don't then say we've got to allow denser development around those transport nodes. That's a difficult issue for government to deal with because you do encounter people who don't want to see that. But there is a balance to be struck there, and it's one that the opposition and the shadow spokesperson have been very constructive in discussions with the Minister's office on. It's one where we recognise that you won't make everyone happy, but we do hope that the government will see fit to negotiate and continue to, I have to say, because the Minister has consulted with the Shadow Minister a lot, but continue to negotiate constructively with the opposition so that we can come out of this with a bill which meets the opposition's concerns, and that should hopefully mean a bill which can make the transition between elections without becoming the subject of election campaigns and therefore unachievable promises as were made by the last government going into the last election.